This is the On Cloudboom Strike. It's not the shoe Helen Obiri used to win the Boston Marathon 2023. It's not the shoe she used to win Boston 2024. And I don't think it's gonna be the shoe she'll wear in the Paris Olympics. So why is On releasing this shoe now? And who is it for? It's time to lace up the Cloudboom Strike and take it for a run. Yo, what's going on? My name is Kofuzi and I'm an elite runner who reviews running shoes here on YouTube. And today I want to talk to you guys all about the On Cloudboom Strike. But before I give you my thoughts on this shoe, I do want to go over some disclosures. This is a pair of shoes that On sent to me for the purpose of review, so I did not have to pay for these shoes. However, nobody's paying me to make this video or to include their brand in this video, and no one's going to get a chance to preview any of my footage or my thoughts before you guys get a chance to see this video on YouTube. So with that disclosure out of the way, let's talk about the On Cloudboom Strike, and let's start with the specs. This is a 39.5 millimeter stack height shoe with a 5 millimeter drop, giving us 34.5 millimeters of stack height in the forefoot. And the midsole in this shoe is actually a little bit complicated. The only midsole foam material that they're using in this shoe is On's Helion HF. That's their hyperfoam, the foam that they reserve only for race applications, but I believe it's in basically 3 sections. There's the main section that you see here kind of going from high up in the back downwards towards the front of the shoe. That's kind of this main stripe of midsole foam. And then there's a little portion on the heel that looks like it's kind of like glued on to the bottom, and it's a little bit offset and jagged of a cut. That's what's creating these spaces that allow the foam to compress even further whenever your foot hits the ground. And the other portion you can't really see all that well from here is the insole. Now, normally the insole is not considered a part of the midsole system, but they're using a very thick insole here. I believe that's what they're calling the bounce board, and it's much thicker than an insole would normally be, and it actually behaves like another layer of midsole, and it sits on top of the carbon fiber plate that's in this shoe. You can actually kind of see it because the upper material that they're using for this shoe is so transparent. So there's this layer of the midsole that you can see, and it looks like it connects to the upper material, but above that line is where the insole sits. And so actually you could feel it as you're moving your finger up the side of the upper, that there is a little bit of a ledge, and that's actually the top layer of the insole, and that's where your toes are actually going to be sitting inside the shoe. My insole, even though they're calling it a drop-in insole style of construction, something that we've seen in both the Speedland and in the Elliott Runner, mine is actually non-removable. It's definitely very much glued down. But my friend Johannes over at Runner's Nerd has a really good video of the drop-in insert that he was able to get out of his shoe. But the question then becomes, if you're not intended to take out the insole from the shoe and say replace it with other kinds of insoles or with replacement insoles, then why did they bother going with the drop-in insole approach in this shoe? I asked On about this, and they said it's so that way they can maximize and get that much more foam, midsole foam, into the shoe, because then they don't have to go with the separate insole layer, and they could also get rid of the strobel board. And the strobel board is typically a piece of material that the upper gets sewn onto that can be glued onto the midsole, and that's usually how uppers and midsoles are attached. By using this drop-in method, they're able to eliminate that layer entirely, and so that's how they're able to squeeze in that many more millimeters of foam, or at least that's the rationale that On has given me. And to stay with the maximizing cushioning approach, the upper is really lightweight in terms of padding. In the heel cup, there's only a couple of bumper pads on each side of the heel, and the tongue remains super thin. Overall, this shoe comes in at a very light weight of 210 grams or 7.4 ounces. Now that we've talked about what the shoe is like on paper, let's talk about what it's like on the road. The Helion HF in this shoe is very responsive, and I'm definitely feeling the extra amount of cushioning that they're able to achieve with the drop-in insole technique that they're using for the Cloudboom Strike. I will say though that it's not quite as cushioned of an experience that I would typically prefer for a marathon super shoe. So the overall sensation that I'm getting is that it is a shoe that gives a lot of pushback with each stride in a powerful way, even if it is a little bit on the dense side. And I think probably the best way that I could describe it is if you've tried the On Cloudboom Echo 3, it's like if you take that same Cloudboom Echo 3, just added maybe 4 or 5 millimeters of really nice foam on top. That's kind of the best way to describe what I'm getting out of the Cloudboom Strike. There is one aspect of the shoe that I think is quite different and unique about this shoe though, and that's coming from the heel. I had to double check with On to make sure that the material of foam that's in this heel portion here is in fact the same foam that's in the main portion of the midsole and in the drop-in insole itself. They confirmed that it is. But there's something about the way that it's attached onto the back of this shoe. Maybe it's the way that the clouds are created, but this back part of the shoe feels super cushioned and very springy. I just wish that they could have brought some of that feeling more forward into the forefoot of the shoe, so that way I could feel like the shoe was a bit more dynamic. Now looking at the footage, I could see that the shoe is compressing quite a bit, but that's not what my foot is really feeling. So like your eyes are seeing something different than what my feet experience. I feel a lot of very responsive foam, but I'm not feeling a lot of cushioned and dynamic foam. And that's really what I'm looking for in that top tier of marathon super shoe, something that's gonna absorb impact well, and then use the momentum of the foam's natural compression, decompression to help spring me forward into my next step. I feel like I'm getting a lot of spring, just not a lot of compression. I feel like I'm still very much on top of the foam, not pushing and working with it. So I'm not sure for me that the Cloudboom Strike is going to be a marathon shoe. I think personally, I think it's a 10K half marathon shoe. And I did race a local 5K in it, and I felt like at those faster paces, that extra responsive foam that they have in this shoe is actually really nice. But when I tried to take the shoe for longer workouts, when I was in the shoe for longer periods of time, I found it a little bit difficult to be in the shoe for those extended periods and extended efforts. Before we wrap up the video, let's take a step back and see where the Cloudboom Strike fits within the broader On lineup. Now, all On shoes have clouds, and those are these holes that are in On shoes. They're channels that cut through the midsole itself that are intended to deform and make the shoe feel soft. Now, lately there have been two types of clouds that On is using, and that's where I'm getting this idea that there are two parallel lines of On running shoes. The first kind is the traditional kind that has the cloud tech. These are hexagonal or sometimes more squared off clouds that exist, and they're usually paired with a speed board, which is a hard plastic plate that's intended to stabilize the shoe so that it doesn't get too squishy or too unstable as these clouds deform as you're stepping on them. Now, I generally don't like the traditional cloud tech style of clouds, with a handful of exceptions, like with the On Cloud Monster. Now, there's another newer type of cloud that On has been using, and that is Cloud Tech Phase. Now, these clouds are different. They're shaped more kind of triangularly. There's just a different shape to them, and they're oriented differently through the midsole depending on the position of the foot that the cloud exists underneath. And that's to better control the way that the foam deforms and then the way that these clouds deform, depending on what each part of the shoe needs. Now, I love this style of cloud, and I also enjoy that these types of shoes get rid of the speed board. Now, this is the On Cloud Surfer. This is a daily trainer. This is the type of shoe that you would use for the bulk of your daily training miles. Now, the other shoe that exists with Cloud Tech Phase right now is the On Cloud Eclipse. Now, this is more of a max cushion style shoe, but they firmed up the foam a little bit, so that way it becomes really exciting when these Cloud Tech Phase clouds, compress and then decompress. It makes for a comfortable long run shoe that can also pick up the pace. So that one is really fun. And then if you were to race, as far as the two different types of cloud shoes go, all those shoes kick up to race product. There's only one style of race product that On has, but even then it's not so simple. Today we're talking about the On Cloudboom Strike, and I feel like this would be a really fun triplet of shoes to be able to work with if you're enjoying the Cloud Tech phase. You have the Cloud Surfer as a daily trainer, the On Cloud Eclipse as your long run shoe, and then for both workouts and racing, you would use the Cloudboom Strike. Now, you might be asking, well, what happens then with the On Cloudboom Echo 3? Where does this shoe fit in within the lineup? Now, part of me was thinking that the On Cloudboom Strike really could have been a replacement for the On Cloudboom Echo. I feel like the shoes are similar enough that if this were called the Cloudboom Echo 4, it would make complete sense to me. But this is another thing that I asked On about, and they told me that they're intending for these two shoes to exist in the lineup simultaneously. So the idea with the Cloudboom Echo 3 is that this is an experience for the type of runner who wants something that's a little bit lower, a little bit more connected to the ground, and has more of a propulsive feel coming from the carbon fiber plate. That's who the Cloudboom Echo 3 is for. And in the alternative, then you have the Cloudboom Strike for someone who wants more of a cushioned sensation. And that's how On is understanding these two shoes. But there is still then that kind of lingering question of, if this shoe isn't the shoe that Helen Obiri wore, what shoes has Helen Obiri been wearing? Well, in 2023 for the Boston and New York marathons that she won in the same year, she was wearing the Cloudboom Tri. And I feel like the Cloudboom Strike is very close, at least visually, to what Helen Obiri was wearing during those races. But the Cloudboom Tri itself, I don't think that's a shoe that ever actually meant it to production, even though I think it was a shoe intended for triathletes to use off the bike. And then in 2024, Helen Obiri wore a shoe that was called the Cloudboom Strike LS prototype, and that LS stands for light spray, which is a basically not quite 3D printing, but it is some sort of spray technique that On developed to be able to shoot on top of the mold of a foot an upper that is going to be snug, strong, but needs no laces. And the difference between that shoe and this shoe is not just the upper, because if you take a close look at those shoes, there is a different positioning of the clouds that are in Helen Obiri's shoe and this shoe, the Cloudboom Strike. There's more clouds in Helen Obiri's shoe, and they're placed not only higher up in the stack, in between the insole and this main layer of midsole, but the clouds are also bigger and there's more of them, and they're placed more towards the forefoot of the shoe. So really what I think the Cloudboom Strike is, it's a bridge between the 2023 Helen Obiri and the 2024 Helen Obiri. Now let's wrap up the video by talking about the buying guide, and I'll talk about some alternatives that you're gonna wanna consider if you're looking at the On Cloudboom Strike. This shoe is available now for $280, and I think for the experience that it delivers, unless you're an On super fan, I think that price is going to be a little bit on the high side. Let's take a look at some of the competition to see where that stacks up. Now, the other shoe that I think that you should compare to the Cloudboom Strike is from Asics, and that's gonna be the Metaspeed Edge Paris. Now, there's both the Metaspeed Sky Paris and the Edge Paris, and I love the Sky Paris, but the Edge Paris was a shoe that I felt was really harsh for me to run in, even though it had the same stack height, drop, and foam as the Sky Paris. The only real difference between those shoes being the plate position, and I feel like there's a similar plate position here as what we're seeing in the Cloudboom Strike. So if you like what the Cloudboom Strike is presenting, I feel like you really have to look at the Metaspeed Edge Paris as well, because that shoe is also lighter and cheaper as it comes in at $250. Now, the last shoe that I think you should compare to the Cloudboom Strike is going to be the Adios Pro 3. And that's because I feel like there are some, not similarities in the foam, but there are kind of like things that remind me of the foams when I think about these two shoes. I feel like if the foam in the Adios Pro 3 got a little bit more dense and was a little bit less dynamic, you'd have the experience that I'm feeling in the Helion HF of the Cloudboom Strike. So if you've tried the Adios Pro 3 and you thought that it's just a little bit too squishy, then the Cloudboom Strike is going to be for you. But on the other hand, if you're worried about the firmness of the Cloudboom Strike, then the Adios Pro 3 could be exactly the type of shoe that you're looking for. And that shoe comes in also at $250. So those are my thoughts on the Cloudboom Strike. I think that this is a shoe for marathoners who are very efficient runners who don't need as much cushion as I do, perhaps because they're not out there on the marathon course for as long as I am. But they also at the same time wanted a little bit more cushion than what the Cloudboom Echo 3 provided. If that describes you, then I think that this shoe is going to be excellent. For everyone else, it's going to be a very interesting half marathon racing option. If you have any other questions about this shoe or any of the shoes that I mentioned today, feel free to put them in the comments down below, or better yet, stop by the live stream that I do Mondays and Thursdays over on the Kofuzi Run Club channel. I'd love to talk to you guys over there in the chat. That's all I have for today, everybody. Thanks so much for making it all the way to the end of this video. Hopefully you guys are staying safe out there on your runs, and I will see you in the next one.
Yo, what's going on?